Alrighty, everybody. So we're gonna get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna turn it over to our lovely executive director, Melissa. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you have questions, save them for later. We'll run over that logistically in a little bit. But as you know, you have a Q&A and a chat function. Feel free to use them as you see fit. And yeah.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Sounds good. And if I freeze up, let me know and I will take off my screen. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you, Marquise, for setting this up. I want to welcome everyone to our Port Candidate Forum and thank Tanisha Jumper especially for being our moderator. She is such a great voice and thinker in this community. And so we're really honored to have her moderating this tonight. Thank you to the candidates. So as you know, this is the position 2 candidate forum for the Port of Tacoma positions. So the candidates in this race are the incumbent Dick Marzano, Elizabeth Pugh, and Jeanette Twitty. So we're really interested to hear what they're going to say tonight. And CHB, Citizens for a Healthy Bay, as a 501c3 nonprofit, does not endorse candidates, but we do have a duty that is recognized by the IRS to educate our community. And so these forums are a way that we let the voters know about the candidates and how they feel about issues that are relevant to the work that we do. So I encourage everyone to vote and make educated decisions and just learn as much as you can about the candidates. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. And thank you, Tanisha, for moderating.
Well, thank you very much for having me. These are always really exciting. My name is Tanisha Jumper, and for those of you who do not know me, I'm the Director of Communications, Strategy, and Engagement for the City of Tacoma. And so educating voters is really important to me. It affects my job every single day. And I think it's really important to make these types of decisions accessible and help not make it so scary when people have to make these decisions. And so in that vein, it's also really important that the candidates also speak directly to the people. I know working on campaigns and being involved with people that are running all the time, sometimes we start to speak in kind of sound bites and our talking points, but really this is really an opportunity for regular people to hear from regular people about why you should represent them. And so if I don't understand the answer you gave, I might ask for clarification because I'm going to assume if I don't, then someone else probably doesn't. And I think it's really helpful for us to have really good dialogue. And I think that's probably what this country is missing more than anything these days is really healthy dialogue. And so I appreciate everyone who's here, and I will do my best to navigate and moderate to the best of my ability so we can get through all the questions, get to the audience's questions, and make sure that we all leave here feeling a little bit more confident in the choices we're going to make for Port Commission. The way that this is going to work today, we're going to let the candidates introduce themselves. Then we're going to jump into some questions that have been pre-prepared. And then we're going to open it up for the audience to ask some of their own questions using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I don't want to take too much time talking about me or my thoughts, so we're gonna jump right into it with introducing the candidates. And so, Marquise, are you going to introduce them, or do you want me to have them introduce themselves? Got it?
Yeah, so we're gonna let them introduce themselves. For all my candidates, you are now able to share your screen. So if you want to do so, we would love to have you on there, and then that way we will hide our non-participants, so everybody on video participants, so everybody doesn't see them, so they'll just see you. So Dick and Elizabeth, if you want to, you should be able to share your videos now. There we go, perfect.
Hi, Dick.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Hi, Elizabeth. Nice to meet you. All right, so we're going to jump right into it, and I will start with the first question. Please take about 90 seconds and just tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and let the people who are watching just know a little bit about you. And we're going to go ahead and start with you, Dick.
Oh, okay, thank you. My name is Dick Marzano. I just recently retired from the Longshore Union. I worked on the waterfront for 52 years. A lifelong Tacoma native. I grew up here, lived and raised on K Street, which is now Martin Luther King Way. Went to Stadium High School. While attending college, started working on the waterfront. And during that time, I was president of the union for 6 years and was attending Port Commission races, and realized and thought that there should be someone on the commission to make it more rounded that has a background in labor and shipping. So that's why I first ran for that position. Been there ever since and love it to this day. I'm interested in the questions and having experienced everything from the waterfront throughout my capacity as a longshoreman and as a port commissioner. I'm very interested and concerned about what all people think. So with that, I'll turn over to Elizabeth.
All right, thank you. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me all right.
Yep.
Got a lot of muting settings going on here. So hi, I'm Elizabeth Pugh, and a little bit about me. I've been born and raised here in Western Washington in the Puget Sound area. So spent my whole life kind of between King and Pierce counties. I've been working in the kind of Tacoma Puyallup area for a little bit over a decade here, first with a manufacturing employer where I was doing HR leadership and learning development, and really loved that aspect of helping folks develop their careers, as well as the fact that there actually was a pretty good community involvement factor for that company. That was something that I was able to promote quite a bit there. And then the last 3 years, I've been working over at Joint Base Lewis McChord, working with service members who are preparing to transition into the civilian workforce. I'm also a mother. I went to school in the area here. Let's see, I have a cat. But basically, I'm very interested in this opportunity to work within the community, because the port is something that I think a lot of us overlook in our day-to-day lives if we don't work there or have someone who's working there, or are involved in some kind of group that's related to the port. And this is a Pierce county-wide position, but really we have impacts far beyond the county lines, right? This is really something that affects us all regionally. And my master's degree was in whole systems design. So pretty much that's all about what happens when you move something over here. What does that do to the rest of the system? And I really see that kind of interconnected web of relationships flowing through the port in a lot of really important ways. So I've been really enjoying the conversations I've been having in this campaign, and looking forward to the one tonight. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to, so can you tell us a little bit what drew you to run for office, and what issues do you want to tackle, or problems that you're hoping to solve by running, Elizabeth?
Yeah, so just kind of building on that idea, honestly, the thing that kind of drew my attention to this was over the years, a while back, realizing how little I did understand about what was going on in ports. I think there's definitely some of those kind of politician jobs that we think of as like the sexy jobs, the governor, the mayor, the legislative, those kinds of jobs. And some of these other positions, which are very, very crucial in our community or in our economy, for our environment, for a lot of things, just aren't being talked about the way that I think that they could be talked about. And so coming from that perspective, I think that's something that I'd like to be able to engage the community in those conversations more in maybe a little bit different way, as opposed to just coming from, this is what I want to do with the port. Well, let me see how this fits into your life. We're really understanding more, what are the things going on in people's lives in our community, and how is the port a way to meet those needs, right? So it's kind of semantics, but I think it actually makes a practical difference. And really the key things that I'm looking at the most would be, environmental accountability for all of our operations at the port is really big with me. And looking at looking at what we're doing through an economic justice lens, and especially as we are still very much in this time of COVID recovery, putting that front and center. I know that's affected our whole community, but we also know it's affected people differently depending on who they are and what their experience and their lived experiences are. So I want to make sure that we're accounting for that, and making sure that everyone has those opportunities, which is really what economic justice is about, right? Just making sure that everyone has the opportunity to pursue those jobs and be successful in our economy.
All right, thank you. Dick, kind of the same question, but a little bit different. So you've been on the port. What makes you continue to run for Port Commissioner, and what are some of the things that you've been working on or want to continue to work on? That is why, why you're continuing. Oh, you're muted. You gotta do that once a day.
My wife would love to have this button, I guarantee you. Anyhow, yeah, one of the things I first ran for the Port Commission is I believe they weren't doing enough to create family wage jobs. And since being on the commission and my history working on the waterfront, I think there's three legs of the stool that need to be continued, and that is creating family wage jobs, environmental stewardship, and transportation infrastructure. Working on the waterfront, I can recall the day when we had a crane driver actually go up into a crane wearing a military gas mask because of the stack emissions that were coming out, just so he could go to work. I look at, and I used to go through the smelter dock down in Point Ruston and have the taste of arsenic. So I knew that in order for this community to grow, we had to make sure our environment and our workers and our communities were safe with what was happening down on the waterfront. And at the same time, grow family wage jobs. And Point Ruston is a perfect example when people put their heads together and have goals in mind of what you can accomplish. I'm proud of the fact of what we've done at the port with the Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy, the Clean Truck Program, and also our infrastructure. I was co-chair of the 167 Coalition to help get that finally moving, which it should have done a long time ago. So as our community grows, it's critically important that we still create living wage jobs in an environmentally friendly way and invest in our infrastructure so people aren't stuck in traffic. They're able to live, play, and work in the Tacoma area.
Thank you. In the fall of 2019, a landmark report from the United Nations Scientific Panel on Climate Change described a far more dire picture of the near-term consequences of climate change than previously thought, and said that avoiding the damage requires us to reduce global climate emissions by nearly 50% by 2030, just 10.5 years from now. This requires a worldwide economic transition at a speed and scale that has no documented historic precedent. The closest model scientists pointed to was the mobilization efforts of the US during World War II. What is the port's role in addressing climate crisis? And what would you do if elected to reduce global greenhouse emissions from Tacoma? Dick, we're going to start with you.
Me? Okay, thank you. As I stated about with the North Ports Clean Air Strategy, we passed a resolution to basically coincide with the Paris Accord. We believe that we can be emissions clean by 2050. 2050 is just the ceiling. It's not the bottom line. We're going to try to get there. Importantly, one of the things I would strive for, though we're just a port commission and working with the Port of Seattle and the Northwest Seaport Alliance, I think one of the biggest problems we have is people being realistic to the fact of where we are with climate change. When you have a great segment of our population not even believing in it, that's the wrong answer. And you're not going to be able to accomplish the goals that are set forth unless you have people getting behind. When you have 99% of the scientists telling the average individual of how important this is, and when a big segment of our society doesn't believe in that, that's a hurdle we have to overcome. So I would be an advocate of getting out and reaching out as much as we possibly can to educate factually what is necessary. You know, when we all leave this great earth, we want to leave it a lot better than how we found it. And for generations to come, we need to have that kind of a statement, and we also need to have a goal in mind and move forward. And I think a big part of that is getting people convinced that this is a reality. This is not, a fairy tale.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, what's the port's role in addressing climate change, and if elected, what do you plan to do?
Right. So I do believe that the port's role is very significant, not just in terms of the operations that are directly underneath the control of the port, but because, again, of all of those different relationships. Port commissioners are, frequently on other commissions and boards, regional councils, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, working with the tribes, working with, the City Council of Tacoma and Fife, et cetera. And so in addition to kind of just, the average person on the street and that building that awareness, it really is about showing how we can make the practical changes to these other partners and working with them towards practical solutions. I think sometimes even people who believe in this kind of are throwing up their hands. I'm going to tell you, my son is in his early 20s. He's in that like Gen Z group that we're still trying to figure out. And I think there is, a set of those folks who are pretty much like, let's just party and burn it down. Well, that's not really what we want, right? Because there is this sense of they are inheriting something. And I would say in a lot of ways, people my age inherited this because quite frankly, the numbers keep getting worse, but we've known about this for decades. And so really, I do struggle when we say things like targets like 2050, because I remember when everyone was coming out with 2020 goals and how companies and governments were doing that. And I haven't seen that the leadership that was in place at that time was actually doing what it took to meet that. Part of it is immediately stopping future investment in things like fossil fuels or things like that. We don't need to put more money into things that we know are putting those carbon emissions into the air. And I think the other thing is, for me personally, I'm not here to be a career politician. I'm here to get some things done. And so, yes, we need to address the, community kind of sense of, what's going on and get that support in the community. But at the end of the day, if I can get the things done that need to get done in the community, bring in green, sustainable infrastructure and jobs that is going to bring in that business and address these climate issues, it's not really my number one priority to make sure that, say, I'm popular enough to get reelected if we can get those things done in 1 or 2 terms on the commission.
Great, thank you. I just got a message that Jeanette is going to try to join us at some point. So if she pops on, we'll pause and let her introduce herself, but we'll keep moving with the questions until then, okay? For years, frac gas, also known as liquid natural gas, was touted as a bridge fuel because even though it is a fossil fuel, the thought was it was less harmful than burning bunker fuel. Now we know that full impacts of natural gas on the environment and public health, and know the fossil fuels soon must be phased out of our energy portfolio. What do you see as a Port of Tacoma's role in transitioning off of high carbon intensity fuels like frac gas and diesel in the maritime shipping and transportation industries? And Elizabeth, we're going to go ahead and start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think I did kind of, jump the gun on that one a little bit. And I did say that I do think we need to move away. Further investment in this is just, we know this is the direction we need to go. And if we need to be there in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, even though we know we're not going to be able to stop climate change, right? I mean, again, a generation ago, we were talking about mitigating. Now we're talking about mitigating and adapting because these effects are happening. We've actually experienced that this summer very clearly. The other thing is about this idea of it being a bridge is, my grandfather who passed away in the late 60s, the company he was working for at the time was already implementing LNG solutions at that time. This is not the new 21st century technology. We had an opportunity if we'd wanted to make that as a transition. I really think it's too late, and we need to start heavily switching to more carbon neutral energy solutions, not just because of the climate, but because I think it's also getting that infrastructure and training our residents and giving people the opportunity to develop into those career fields is going to give us a competitive edge in the global marketplace. There are natural gas or other kinds of projects like that with fossil fuel. There are projects for green and renewable fuel sources as well. We're not inviting those to our community, and I would rather us be a leader in that than just kind of going along and kind of getting dragged along with the rest of the world as we see other ports and communities adapt over the next few decades.
Thank you. Dick, what do you see as the port's role in transitioning off of high carbon intensity fuels like frac gas and diesel in the maritime shipping and transportation industries?
Yeah, one of the things we're striving to get is to get just exactly there is what you said, biorenewable, different fuels. I do look at LNG as a transitional fuel. One of the things that you're not going to be able to do, and they haven't done it, even though they're trying to get there, is to be able to have the big vessels that call into the Puget Sound be able to use the bio or solar, things of that nature. In Norway, they do have experiments going on with a lot smaller vessels. Maersk Shipping, which is one of the largest, if not the largest shipping line in the world, has vowed to have biorenewable fuels by 2030. We are closely monitoring that with them and trying to work with them in any avenues we can to try to get there sooner. The maritime industry in the Puget Sound area, and especially in Tacoma, accounts for over 42,000 jobs. And before we go and say we're not going to do any more shipping, we want to make sure that we have people for the jobs for those people. So I think we can get there. It's not going to happen overnight. This contamination in our environment got here by over 100 years of people not doing the right thing. We got to keep working in that avenue, and the quicker we can, as new technologies come into place, we're going to utilize them.
So a follow-up question for you, Dick. What do you think is the holdup, or what are some of the things that are in the way of the port moving there a little bit faster?
Well, we have been moving there already. We've got an example is we're transitioning our fleet to hybrid or electrification. South Intermodal Yard, we got a grant through the U.S. government that is going to be all electric trucks that'll be working there. We're putting in, and we'll be at our next commission meeting, putting in the charging stations and moving in that avenue. So we're moving there. One of the things that we can't do is move the vessels away from the present fuels they presently use. The IAM International Maritime Organization has put some rules on the types of fuels they can use, but it's only within 200 miles of coastal waters of the United States. We need to get them more involved with transitioning the shipping industry to cleaner, better fuels and more biorenewable energies.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, in that same vein, kind of what, if you were to be elected, like what would be the first 2 or 3 things you would be putting on the conversation table to make that happen a little bit faster?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I appreciate that there are, conversations happening with other communities, other ports, other companies about kind of best practices, looking at those opportunities to get that funding from the federal government, which I am anticipating there's going to be more opportunities for that over the next couple of years versus maybe previous administration at that level, if people do what they're saying they're going to do. I think it's interesting, and I just had this response when I was thinking about Norway, because we all kind of nod our heads when we hear, oh, well, of course Norway is doing that. Why can't we say, well, of course the Port of Tacoma is doing that? These are strategic decisions. And I think the other thing is we do really need to look at, how are we going to keep people employed? That would be why I would say, what are those projects that can be brought here? My understanding is that there are certain types of projects that are more in that, green sustainable energy space that aren't even looking at us, because we're looking at continuing to do that investment in, say, natural gas. We need to kind of put that out on the street, that this is what we want to attract, and that we're going to help our people through this. As there is a transition. And just to the point that it's not going to happen overnight, it's obviously not going to happen overnight, which is why we need to get past this are we, aren't we kind of conversation as fast as possible, so that we can prepare our community, because there are going to be changes in people's lives. And, professionally, I work with people who are in the middle of major life transitions. We all like change when it's our idea. When it's not our idea, it's really, really challenging. And so we need to give people a chance. We need to give people on-ramps to those transitions as careers may change, or we need to do reskilling in the community. And honestly, I think a lot of that is going to mean working with other, levels of government, whether that's Pierce County and looking at how we can work together to meet the commitments their councils made, the city of Tacoma and the state of Washington as well. But I think the first thing is kind of drawing that line in the sand that says, this is what we're doing. If you want to do this, if you have this business, we are ready for that.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to remind the audience, if you have questions or something they're saying and you want some follow-up, please input that the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will be sure to try to ask those questions, time permitting. So click away, type away. So we were just talking about transitioning, and what does a just transition look like to you? For reference, just transition refers to the principle, policies, and practices that protects frontline workers and fence line communities while mobilizing the community to transform from an economy based on extracting natural resource and heavily polluting industries to one that's generative and meets environmental and public health goals. Dick, I'm going to start with you. What does a just transition look like to you?
It means going to work on the waterfront and not worrying about the air that you're breathing. I think that's an important part because it's not just for the worker, but it's also for the community. That air doesn't just stay in that little area. So
Right.
I would like to see that, and that's going to happen as we transition our fleet, and then as we get terminal operators transitioning their fleet to cargo handling equipment that can be run on electrification and or hybrid type of biorenewable fuels. That can happen. And then as the vessels that emit the emissions and that fuel comes online, we would be doing that too. So I could envision at some time going into a port area that used to be heavily contaminated with different toxics, of not knowing if you're in a work area or if you're in a playground, because the air and the environment that you're in will all be great for any consumer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Elizabeth, what does a just transition look like to you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's definitely making sure that as we make these transitions, we're not negatively impacting so much anyone's part of life. Now, what we're talking about though here with these major transitions is I can't tell you your job's going to look exactly the same or this thing is going to look exactly the same in 10 years. I don't think if you look at the history of the world and definitely of the US industry, that anybody could say that, right? A lot of us are in jobs that we didn't even know existed 10 or 20 years ago or would exist. So there are some things where I think we need to be really honest and say, not everything's going to change, but and some things are going to change, and we want the community to be a part of figuring those things out. I obviously will agree that, you know, having clean air to breathe, or, you know, when we had this big heat wave recently and everyone and their families jumped in all the water all around the area, you know, I had that thought too of like, yeah, that's really important, right? So like on several levels, it's too hot for me to stay in the office. People had to close down their small businesses and all this stuff. And then we're going to go jump in this water that we hope is not going to, you know, poison our children. So that's really important. I think the other thing that we really need to be looking at is, you know, again, any communities that, you know, are historically not as privileged in some of these areas. So I think about what's happening in ports in pretty much every city, right? The people who usually are closest to any kind of noise pollution or actual pollution are always the closest. So we really need to look at, as we're trying to address like housing issues in our community, how we are doing that with the same kind of just transition mindset. And I think as well, when we're looking at the you know, tide flat development and other types of businesses, or, you know, where we're going to put housing and those kinds of things. So those are conversations we need to have. And I also know there's a lot of different organizations in the community that already work on things like apprenticeships and these other kind of job training programs that are reaching out to kind of all areas in our communities. And I would want to make sure that we're, you know, learning from experts. If this is something that we haven't had to do, let's all have that conversation and let people do what they do best to make sure that the solutions are going to transition for everyone. But I can't tell you every little day is going to be a cakewalk. This is really tough stuff we're talking about. You mentioned before that the only scale change we've seen like this was the mobilization for World War II. But I'm going to tell you, we did that. Right. And so, yes, a lot of that means investment beyond what the port's doing, but that is something that I understand as a commissioner, you know, you are able to take that information to you know, the state leadership and say, these are the things that really matter to our community, and support bills and support projects that way too. So, those are just some of the things I'm thinking about. Definitely still continuing to have conversations in the community. And I think one of the things that's really important is that I want people to understand what my values are and what I'm here to do. And I also know I don't have all of the solutions. So I do want to keep hearing from people about their ideas and where they're thinking something's going to work, or where we might actually be creating a barrier or an obstacle that doesn't exist already, right? Because that would definitely be working against our goals.
Thank you. So we were talking a little bit about transitions, and we're going to transition to a port's relationship with the tribe. As a part of the port's work, it regularly engages with other governments like the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, whose traditional fishing and gathering grounds have been in the tide flats since time immemorial. Unfortunately, industrial activities in the port have come in direct conflict with the traditional rights of the tribal members to the land and the fish of this area. As a port commissioner, how can you help better foster relationships between the port and the frontline communities established, especially the tribe? What skills and experience do you have working with frontline communities? And if elected, how will you work to uplift the port's relationship with the tribe? And Elizabeth, we're going to start with you.
So I do know that in there has been progress on this, right? That there are some formal ways that the commission is checking in with the tribe at this time. I know that has not been the case. I think we need to continue to build on that. So really, this all goes back to are we holding up our end of the bargain, basically, of basically what the, if we go way back to the Medicine Creek Treaty and then subsequent decisions and agreements that have been made since then, which was, 150, 170 years ago, that this really basic premise that any major impacts to those, historical traditional waterways and those areas, that the tribe would be consulted about that. And what we're hearing from the tribe is that they definitely don't feel consulted about things. They're kind of saying, hey, I got the same, notice of proposed land use action, notice everybody else get in the community. That's not consultation. I think it's also really interesting. There's been some proposals, and I've seen that there are some officials in Washington state who have actually said, hey, we're going to move our office to this consult and consent model, which basically says, hey, we're in this together. We need to make these decisions together. And, I think that goes back to one of the things that I've seen when I have worked with, whether it's community groups or when I was doing HR and we do like employee engagement surveys, is really the only worst thing you can do than not ask somebody's input is to take their input and do nothing with it. Right? Or do what you were going to do anyhow and not take them into consideration. People feel lied to when that happens. And so I think that's why that model of saying this really has to be a collaboration. It should not be this negotiation where we're trying to have one side or the other win. Not that I'm saying that's necessarily what it's been. But we all live here. We're neighbors. This is our community collectively. And so I think we should act that way. As far as my work in the community, a lot of my work, like I said, has been with job seekers, basically kind of talk to everybody and anybody when you're, doing the hiring process. I've also, run a little arts community meetup that's got a few hundred people who's been participating in that in the last few years. And I think I'm not going to go through my whole volunteer list experience, but I've been on a few boards, including a couple of city commissions as well. And so I think the one thing that I will say I heard from my private sector work as well as my community work is that people are always going to say communication is one of the problems. Always, 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 right? And when you're going through transitions of times of change, the guidance is that you need to communicate somewhere between 3 and 7 times as much as you would normally communicate. So when you think you're communicating too much, there's probably someone who's still saying there, hey, you didn't ask me. Hey, I didn't get to say something about that. Hey, what are you going to do about this? And so on the one hand, we know we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get an A+ rating on that. And because we know it's so vitally important, it really needs to be really, really a push to at least let people know that they're being heard and give them reasons why, if we aren't going to take that guidance, right, at least let them know that we've heard the heart and kind of the need underneath the solution, even if we're not going to take their tack at how we're going to solve the problem. And I think that's something that we really need to talk about more. In politics, we get so into, and in governance, so into my solution versus your solution without ever stopping to say, what is the real need that we're trying to meet that we have in common? Because there's probably a third option that would better suit both of those needs at the same time.
Thank you. And I can testify to the communicate way more than you think as the director of communication, people telling me they never heard what I said. So Dick, what have you done to try to foster better relationships with the tribe since you've been in the seat for a while? And what skills and experience have you used to be successful in those ways? And what will you do, to continue to uplift that relationship, or to maybe mend some places where maybe you need to be mended?
Sure. Well, you touched on it right away when you said communications, because the fact of the matter is, no matter how many times you either reach out or you think you've communicated, it's never enough. We used to have luncheons with the Puyallup Tribal Council on an annual basis, and that's kind of been put to the wayside. And a big part of it is the council, just like the commission, but the council, they're busy with their gaming operations, completely understandable. But we do work with the Puyallup Tribe, and we have a subcommittee right now of 2 of our commissioners that work with the tribe. And what we're trying to do is set up what I think we should have is semi-annual meetings with the council and the full port commission to understand what we're trying to do and what they're trying to do, so we can work in collaboration and moving forward. Perfect examples are some of the environmental things that we have done working with the tribe. Gogol Heidi. Right now we're working on the lower Wapatu Creek habitat with the Puyallup Tribe. These are things that are near and dear to both of our hearts. So by working together and continuing that can open up other avenues and other things that we can sit down and talk. Like you said, the more we reach out, or the more that they reach out, we can't continue to reach out. We got to sit down and communicate and talk. Our executive director has talked to Chairman to Bill on several occasions. What we're trying to do right now, like I told you, is sit down and where we can have a formal meeting so we can really get to know each other, for one thing, because their council changes a little bit, and at the same time understand a little bit of their plans. When the land settlement was claimed, Chairman Dillon was there, we went together to Asia to try to secure a customer for their properties that are on the port. Those are things we need to look at now and in the future to see if they want some development done down there and how we can help do that and grow those jobs. So I think by knocking on the door and they knocking on ours, we're going to keep doing that until we get together. And there's going to be differences. You're always going to have differences, but the fact of the matter is you can resolve those differences when it's good for the whole.
Thank you. I'm going to remind our audience that we will be taking your questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please submit them at the Q&A button so that we can make sure we get them into the conversation. So this year, through the pandemic and through there was a lot of racial unrest, and a lot of organizations kind of stepped forward and addressed becoming an anti-racist organization, and how they would, kind of live amongst the community and support different communities that have not been supported in the past. And so this question is going to go to you first, Dick. How would you bring a lens of anti-racism to the port, and what does it look like for the port to be committed to anti-racism?
Yeah, I was proud to stand with my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Eng and Commissioner Keller, along with employees raising the Black Flags Matter over our port building. I was also proud to raise the flag for Pride Month. One of the things that we had a motto in our Longshore local, that is, an injury to one is an injury to all. And I believe that in life itself. Growing up on K Street as a young kid, I didn't see the difference between a person of color or myself. But as I've grown and seen some of the disadvantages that I, as a white person, never had to experience, it makes me sad to say that what we need to do is to have not just the port or the employees, or I think society needs to reflect what our environment is, and having those opportunities. We have Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, of which I'm a member of on the port. And we're looking at avenues and ways where we can open up various aspects to all segments of our community. Working with Bates Vocational School, Clover Park School, with regards to trades, that as the port grows, so will certain jobs, and making sure that the community we have is able to be trained in those fields so they can step into good living wage jobs. So I'm going to continue down that avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
So trying to figure out how much of my like going back to my childhood I want to unpack here a little bit. So I think one of the things that I will say, and obviously we're talking about a lot of different intersectional issues, but I'm going to say as a white woman, I'd say one of the things that we, the Caucasian white folks, when we are in positions of leadership, is we really owe the community that we are doing our work. So one of the things now that I'm thinking about my childhood is I actually grew up in a predominantly Black community, a neighborhood. There were definitely years where I was like one of 3 white kids in my class. However, it was also a private Catholic school. So when we start talking about intersectionality, I mean, there were things that are kind of those negative stereotypes that I think a lot of, you know, people who grew up in the suburbs have about inner city communities that were absolutely true. And I also knew people, brown and Black people, whose families were better off than mine. So I also really was like raised with this whole thing of where, when we're talking about access, we need to make sure that we are not so much saying that one, you know, that like this thing means this thing, right? There are historical barriers that have been in place for certain people that keep being resurrected over and over and over again in our communities. And I think that is really where we need to focus, but not to assume that every single person, because they fit one identifier, needs the same things. And this really got me thinking about, so I'm definitely not an expert. I'm still trying to do my own work. I was fortunate enough when I was on the Seattle Women's Commission that we actually were brought into doing some of the anti-racist training that the city employees were a part of at the time. And I'm going to tell you, there were some things that even for me, where this was a constant conversation about race and culture my entire life, there were still things that I, you know, was still waking up to then and I'm still waking up to now. But one of the things I think about is those little cartoons, if you've seen them, about equality versus equity versus justice, right? And so I think we really are ready to keep moving down that path, right? It's equality is the idea that, you know, no one can see over the fence. So we give them all little boxes to stand on, but it's the same box. And then equity is I'm going to give you whatever you need to stand on to see the ball game. And justice is removing the barriers. So I think that really is the thing that we need to be focusing on. And I also think we need to be careful about putting too much pressure on other people in the room. So if I'm identifying as white and I'm identifying as, you know, cisgender or whatever, it's not really fair for me to just kind of wait for the brown person or the queer person to bring things up. I need to be looking at making sure that I'm building that awareness that of discomfort that other people are having, that I don't have. I literally don't have those things. I don't see them unless I make the time and put the effort in to see them. So I think that's one of the first things is, well, obviously believe other people. I will say that's actually the very first thing. Believe other people, do our own work, work on our own stuff so that if other communities want to see us as allies, that they can trust what we're doing, and that we can then build better relationships to continue to work on those barriers and removing those obstacles. Because I think everyone's capable. That's definitely not the right. We're not talking about handouts or special treatment. We're just talking about removing unfair, unjust barriers and obstacles that if everyone in our community had been part of building our society in the first place, it just would have been designed better. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It just would have been designed differently. So we're just going back to the blueprint and saying, okay, if I'd invited you to the table the first time, then, you know, what would you have said?
So what does that specifically look like for the port? How do you see that? How would that ideology manifest itself at the port?
Right. So, I mean, I think it's So part of it's going to be continuing to work with, labor and how they are not just working with their team members, but also looking at why are certain people trending towards these careers and why they're not. That was definitely something that I looked at when I was in human resources. There was one department in this one company I worked at, and it was just the hardest thing to find women at all who wanted to work in that department. And you kind of have to ask yourself why, right? We kind of just go, oh, well, women don't want to work there. Just only men like this kind of work. And it's like, usually it's a bigger story than that. So I think it's partly making sure that people have those on-ramps and are aware of opportunities that maybe, again, historically, people that they identify with did not go into those career paths. I think it's also something where we can look at building in that social and economic justice lens into when we're doing contracts, right? Looking at the partnerships that we're building in the community, and kind of going back to what I had said about like apprenticeships and training. There's also a lot of organizations in our community that already work on these issues. So believe the experts, ask them to come in and be willing to learn and be humble about where those things are. Again, I'm doing my work, I'm trying to learn, but I am absolutely not an expert on all of this. There are people who are, and I would like to listen to them.
Thank you. Dick, I have a similar question to you. So if you were, at the end of your next term, if you were to be reelected, what would you feel like would be a significant advancement in anti-racism work for the port? Like, what if you could snap your fingers and be 4 years ahead of time, like what would you have accomplished to really show that the port's an anti-racist organization?
Yeah, one of the things that we have to realize is not all high school students who graduate are going to go to college. Some of them like working with their hands. So I'm going to go back to the trade issues. Everybody who wants to leaves high school is looking for a job or going to college, whatever. I would go out and to the various communities. I've spoken at Stadium High School, Wilson High School, TCC in the past, and I'd go there working with the different tech schools, show them the trades that are going to be needed. So giving those opportunities, I think it's critical. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that a great mechanic can go any place in the world and go to work. So I would look at doing something like that. And we have in the past worked with those schools. I would try to encourage that, be it a longshore, not a longshore, but be it a waterfront type of environment, so that, because there's all kinds of needs that are happening now, in fact, and need to be able to be, brought forth to the communities that may not see that all the time. Going to those various neighborhood councils in those areas, I think that would be very helpful. So I would encourage that. Speaking of, just not only the Black community, but women who didn't have the opportunity back in the mid 80s. I was a labor relations committee member, knowing we didn't have any women in the waterfront. We ended up, through a lot of hard work, waiving rules so that we could get not only women, but even women of color back into our union. And I'm real proud to say that some of them became, and still are, leaders within our union. So.
Great, thank you. So audience, we got a couple more questions and we'll get to your questions. So if you have a question you were just dying to ask, please submit it at the Q&A button. So let's start with Dick. What's the hardest leadership challenge you've faced? And what was the lesson that you learned in that challenge?
Oh, wow. Good question. Good question. I can tell you the hardest vote I ever took was forming an alliance with the Port of Seattle. I grew up where we were always competing with Seattle. And what I realized through time is that we were competing for a race to the bottom. Our market share was going to Canada and Southern California, and we were fighting each other for whatever was left. By forming the alliance in 2015, we now speak with one voice. We go to Washington, D.C. with one voice, to the state capitol with one voice, trying to secure the work and so we can provide more jobs for our community. Port of Tacoma is called the Port of Tacoma, but really we're the port of the state of Washington. our region is. When I first started working, all we had to do was get the cargo off the ship and onto the dock. Now you've got to get it off of the ship, onto the rail car, and east of the Mississippi, get it to the Chicago area, because that's the consumption base. So the hardest vote I had to take was forming the alliance. And I guess the heartbreak I had is when president of the union having to call on the widows of someone who just got killed on the waterfront. That was the hardest.
Thank you. Elizabeth, what has been one of your hardest leadership challenges, and what did you learn from it?
Sure. So in terms of things that are actually kind of hit me the most, it actually, what was coming up for me was my experience in the private sector whenever we had to come to a decision where maybe someone wasn't going to be able to continue in our employ. Those were always really challenging for me because I wanted to make sure that we had done everything that was ours to do to set that person up for success, right? At the end of the day, everyone's going to make their own decisions, but there's really a difference. And this is a conversation I would have with other leaders in our organizations. There's really a difference between someone just deciding that they're going to wake up in the morning and just do a bad job, right? Most of us don't try to do that. So it's looking at what can we learn from basically something that was a fail all around. Obviously we know people, come and go for jobs and not everything's a great fit, but really, is there something to be learned from that? So kind of working backwards, right? Did we set the right expectations? So a lot of times in that world, and I've just spent so much time in those like interview scenarios that, people are always worried about impressing the employer, but you should also be worried about the employer impressing you. And especially when you're early in your career, you don't know what you're looking for. So are we giving people the right information to evaluate? Because people just need money a lot of the time, right? So we just say, yes, we're like, money, that's great. And we don't always know exactly what we're getting into. Did we onboard them properly? Did we check in with them? Was there some issue that was potentially like a medical issue happening in their family or some other factor that was affecting them that could have set them up for success before we kind of get on this spiral downhill? So just from a personal level, having any of those kinds of conversations where it's not that trying to move it away from blame and more towards understanding and learning, and also, not sending someone out the door like, hey, this is all on you. It's like, this is what the situation is. So those are the hardest ones. I just believe so much in people. I would always love to work with people and kind of help them out. And unfortunately, that's not always the way we get to do that in organizations. So definitely have those conversations, but try to make sure that not only were we being legal, but like ethically, morally feeling like we're doing the best that we can with what's within our power. So pretty much any of those situations, discomfort is just information saying, hey, you need to look at this better, right? That's what anxiety and fear and anger all are. It's just, you need to look at this. I think that's going to be really important, obviously, all the time, but especially right now, as we are facing those kinds of challenges like climate change, like this COVID recovery that we still have not at all felt the economic impact on, right? When everybody's rent goes up in a couple months and all these things start swinging in the next few months here, we're going to have to make some really tough choices. And the silver lining there is that it gives us a chance to sit down and really look at what's important and ask ourselves where we're doing what's right for us now and where things can be changed. So I think that ability to reflect and then put those changes into action is going to be really, really crucial going forward.
Thank you. All right, my favorite kind of questions. Dick, what is your vision for Port of Tacoma in 20 years? Talk us through how your values as a person, the community leader, shape that vision, and what do you hope to, set in motion?
20 years, huh? That's good. I envision an infrastructure that you won't even know a port exists. It'll be an infrastructure that moves freight and people without the bottlenecks you now see. Part of the problem we've always done, we've reacted, not acted. So I envision that. I envision Tacoma being one of the premier ports along the West Coast, with a rail structure that moves cargo to the Midwest and beyond without any delay of traffic. Things will be so good. And one of the things that we'll all be doing it, we'll be doing it in clear blue sky. We will not see the pollution. We will not see, our air quality will be so much better, and the jobs will be abundant. We will have a society that doesn't judge you by how you look, but what you do and how you do it. So I'm a great optimist, always have been. If the glass is getting half empty, I just get a smaller glass and now it's half full. So I'll continue to look that way. And I sincerely believe in the goodness of all people. And I think it will reflect on where we are as a port and as a city as we move forward.
All right, Elizabeth.
Excellent. So 20 years, definitely that balance of what would be amazing and what's practical. Because when I think about what's amazing, I mean, I grew up in kind of a sci-fi geeky family. So I'm like, okay, so what can we take from Star Trek? Again, we're going to have impulse power, this kind of thing. Yeah, but I mean, things that I'd like to see, there's definitely been some great conversations I've gotten to be a part of recently about what kind of development we can do along that waterfront area so that, the cranes are not the only thing that we think of when we think of, the port area and the waterfront area there. So, continuing to kind of build on what has already happened in terms of, recreation and kind of as a destination. I'm also very passionate about art. So in performing arts, and I'm on the Arts Commission. So being able to see the, Pierce County area being as much a destination for, culture and those kinds of things and having spaces for that, as we see maybe, a Seattle or a San Francisco. So I think there's opportunities to incorporate that into the port's direction in the waterfront area. I'm thinking back to the kind of offhanded comment I made earlier, though, but about like Norway, where we all kind of go, oh, well, Scandinavia, like, of course, well, that would be really great. I would like people to go, oh, okay, I want to do this, new project with, hydrogen or wind or solar or whatever. And they're like, where would be great. We want to go pitch this to Pierce County and the Port of Tacoma. We want to work on these kinds of projects. And I'd really like to see a community where we have, and this is really where this is beyond the port specifically, this really is about a larger conversation about how we see our community through cyclical times of change, but has those safety nets in place for people so that when you have that blip that's going to affect you because you need to, something happened with the economy or something happened with the weather, when all those things are going to happen, you're making that job transition, that, 1 or 2 months of that isn't going to totally mess up your life. And I think that is going to be really, really crucial that we continue to partner with and advocate for things like security around housing, security around healthcare access. So I know these are much bigger issues in the port, but I think the kinds of changes we need to make to get us set up for the workforce of really the 21st century that we're now, 20 years into. And a lot of this green economy, sustainable, energy that I think we need to be moving towards. We need to work on making sure that there is some more safety net for those humps and bumps we're going to go through. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get the commitment. People are going to be exhausted. We're going to be drained. We're going to be afraid, and we're not going to be able to get the commitment to make the changes that we have to make in the community. So I know I kind of took a negative impact on, take on that, but I think what I would like to see is that we've been successful in building that, so that our residents know that if they are going to put the work in, that they will see those positive results, right? Because I do, believe people want to do a good job. They want to support their families. They, want to feel like what they're doing contributes to the community and is appreciated and valued by other people, all the way down to, again, when I worked in manufacturing, I know that my colleagues and I, if we were in a grocery store, so we did coffee, if you look at a package of coffee, you could see what machine it came off of. You wanted to be able to point to that and say, this came off of my machine. I ran this coffee, right? I packaged that. So even if it's small things, we want to know that what we do matters. And we need to make sure that our community members are supported so that effort does pay back into their lives and into the community. And so that would be my dream for all of us in this area, is that we could have that kind of society.
Thank you. So I have one more question. I'm gonna take my own liberties. So, we've talked about, the workers, we've talked about the tribe, we've talked about the frontline communities, we've talked about the business owners. When you are, when you're sitting in that room and you're voting, who's the person that you're thinking of first and foremost when you're making these decisions that are going to affect where the port ends up in the next 20 years? Elizabeth?
Ooh, I just kind of, maybe this is selfish, but I mentioned earlier that I have a son, and he lives up in King County, so he's not in Pierce County, but he's definitely affected by what happens in this community. And I kind of joke with him that he's also my favorite endorsement that I've gotten, because when I told him I was thinking about doing this, he was like kind of honest with me. He goes, I really don't understand anything about the Port of Tacoma. Like, I really don't know anything about that, but like, I think you'd be doing it for the right reasons, et cetera, et cetera. But like I talked about before, he has ideas about what he wants to do with his career. He talks to me about, his goals for having a family someday. And I also hear from him and his friends that, and we're seeing this from the older generation too, like the millennials, like these people in their 30s who are saying, I don't think I can have children in this world. I cannot afford to have children. I don't want to bring children into a world that is going to have, I don't want to have them suffer. And so when I really think about that, it's like, I want a world for people like my son who are going to have opportunities and feel like they can plan for something in 20 or 30 years, And honestly, he's also one of my biggest critics, because I'm going to tell you, I've had other ideas about things I wanted to do in my life, and he hasn't always said it was a good idea. So he's very honest with me. I raised him that way. I'd appreciate it, but it's a little tough sometimes. So yeah, that's the image in my mind, is my son, but I think that's a stand-in for, all of these people who are coming of age and entering the workforce and trying to figure out the next 20, 30 years of their lives. And then, very selfishly, maybe that means I get some grandbabies someday. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Dick, who are you thinking about?
Yeah, well, Elizabeth kind of touched on it. I think about my grandkids. And the reason I do that is because I want them to be proud of not only me, but of the area that they see and what we've done with it. I served on the Foss Waterway Development Board, and if people can recall, it was not a place to go down to. It's now a destination place. Point Ruston's a destination place. Tacoma is a destination place with the museums and what the city has done to revitalize downtown in different areas. So, this is something that I think about, that as I go back and mention, a great port also has a great city, and working together hand in hand, it can be a destination for the grandchildren, for the grandpas, and for all segments. So that's what I think about.
Thank you. Now we're going to get to these audience questions. So the first question is, the port allowed PSE to build its facility despite opposition from the tribe. How can the port repair its relationship with the tribe after that? Dick, I'm going to ask you first.
Yeah, is how can we repair our relationship?
Repair a relationship with the tribe.
Yeah, one of the things is, once again, consultation and meeting. Reaching out, sitting down and talking. One of the things that I've known throughout my career that happens, if you're not sitting down with a person and a rumor starts or someone says something, by the time it gets to 10 or 20 people, it's been so convoluted, it's unbelievable. It's not there. So we need to continue to reach out to the tribe and sit down with them so we can discuss their future, our future, and our futures together. And I'm going to be an advocate of that. Like I said earlier, we have a subcommittee. We're working on that. Our CEO, Eric Johnson, is working on that with their chairman. We're going to be having a meeting. It's going to happen soon. When, I can't tell you, but I know we're going to be having a meeting because we both need to do that.
Thank you. Elizabeth, what do you think needs to be done to repair that relationship?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously that the communicate. And like I said before, about the kind of the only thing worse than not talking to someone or getting their feedback is getting it and then just doing whatever you want to do anyway. So I think that, I think to build that relationship, we need to really consider on that side of the port what things, again, like trying to look at this from a collaborative standpoint, not so much, a negotiation standpoint. Where can we kind of give wins to the tribe? As a new commissioner, I would be kind of in an interesting position because on the one hand, I'm kind of unknown. I'd have to build those relationships from scratch, but also I wouldn't have kind of any baggage of any past actions coming forward. So I would definitely be looking for opportunities to, show that desire for collaboration and take action on that earlier as opposed to later, because I think it would be very important to be able to build that trust early on.
Thank you. Dick, a follow-up question for you.
Sure.
If you could do something different in that process, would you do anything different? Seeing where it ended up with the tribe, just the LNG and that.
Yeah, like I said, once again, is sitting down and meeting. One of the things when I think it was last year or 2 years ago, two of our commissioners went down to meet with the chairman at that time, and we're in the reception. I've sent letters in my capacity, trying to arrange meetings. Yeah, there's no doubt, hindsight is great. And if we could, we would have, camped at their doors, whatever, make sure we could get in and see, because it's critically important. There's no doubt, what we do and where we do it. It's on their historical lands, and we need to be held accountable, and at the same time, making sure that they understand and know. There's no reason why we can't work together. We have on a lot of environmental issues and other things, and as we get into other problems and other discussions. A perfect example is the 167 Coalition, which I was co-chair and which a Puyallup tribe was a member. So that's just an example of what we can do when we get together and sit down and talk. So that's what I would be still pushing for.
Thank you. So when you look at the leadership of the port, from the program managers to the directors to the executive leadership to the commission, quite honestly, there are not a lot of people of color. How important do you think it is that the port's leadership reflect the diversity of the community? And what do you think would be different if the port's leadership did reflect the community? And Elizabeth, we're going to start with you on that one.
Okay. So, I mean, I do think it is very important. And I'm also acknowledging that, me putting myself forward as a candidate isn't necessarily improving that situation. So I think it goes back to trying to understand how we got where we are. So is there, some process that is eliminating people at certain points? Are people not seeing this as a career path? Are we not getting just job announcements and opportunities out to everyone in our community? This is something that I know on the like city commissions I've been on. This has definitely been something that we've looked at, is saying, who's just sharing our message on social media, who's involved in that conversation and sees this as part of your life. Because quite frankly, as institutions, at least this is my perspective, and I'm definitely open to discussion on this, but as institutions have had barriers to certain groups of people, those groups of people tend to go, great, you don't want me there, I'll just go over here and do my own thing, like I don't really need you. And I think that's a big miss. So I don't understand all of the history of kind of how we got here and the specifics, and that's something that I would want to understand more, why people are not putting themselves forward or why the selection process is not encouraging. people to come forward, or if there is in fact something that is keeping people from moving along. Part of that, of course, is getting people into leadership that represent different communities so that we do have those role models. I know for myself, really important for me to see more women, right, in positions. And so I'm sure if people who have, different identities or different life experiences, when you realize you're not going to have to be the first one in the room, and that everyone's going to swivel their head every single time XYZ topic comes up, or you're going to have to carry the message for everyone like you, or those kinds of things. We need to look at how we're going to make sure that we're not putting a lot of burden on people as they come into those roles, and kind of we hit those first, right? We know that in the development towards justice, unfortunately, a stop along the way is often tokenism. That's not where we want to stop, but we know that sometimes happens. So how are we also supporting people who are, kind of brave enough to step into spaces that maybe are not super comfortable, and not putting that burden on those people?
Yeah, thank you. Dick, what are your thoughts about how important it is for the port leadership to reflect diversity of the community, and what do you think is different about the port when that happens?
I think it's critically important. And right now we do have several people of color that are in directors of certain segments that we do have. Several years ago, we went out for an executive director. We did a national search. We ended up hiring a woman. When she left, her deputy director was placed in that position. And then when he retired, we went out again for another executive director. I think what needs to be done is opportunities and having the knowledge of what it takes to get into those positions. It's something that people work and strive for, and it's just being able to give those opportunities. I think by having some of our directors with people of color, they will get the opportunities to look at, okay, if I want to be an executive director, let's say, or a deputy, what do I have to do? What do I have to learn? Do I have to learn about the rail yards? Do I have to learn about the maritime, things of that nature? So I think it's important that they have the ability to go to the various educational classes, seminars that actually teach different things like that. But then it's given the opportunity. You have to hire someone. Sometimes you don't know how deep the water is until you get in. And that's what you need to do, is be able to, get that opportunity. And it does reflect on a commission when we're not looking like the community we represent.
Yeah, thank you. So both of you talked a lot about the future. So what are the competitive industries of the future, and how do we in Tacoma connect with them for the prosperous future? How do we kind of connect to those things and get on the train before it's an old thing? So Dick, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, that's a question. If someone could bottle that into one little answer, they could be writing any kind of thing they want. Shippers and customers look for cost, reliability, and productivity. And those are the things, the main three elements that they look for. And so as long as we can be reliable, cost effective, have a highly productive labor force, we can meet those challenges. And we've been able to do that. When I was president of the Longshore Union, I remember traveling with the port to Asia to call in a new customer. And when the chairman of Evergreen at the time asked about the labor situation, John Tripser was our executive director. Well, here's the president of the Longshore Union. Why don't you ask him? Nowhere did it ever happen where management and labor went hand in hand calling on customers. We've been doing that, the port has, since the late 60s, and other ports have followed suit on that. So I think as long as we keep those labor relations together, don't get me wrong, we never always agree eye to eye, I can tell you that. But the fact is, we're always in agreement when it comes to creating more job opportunities for the workers.
Thank you. Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so if you're talking about just general job growth in general, there's kind of a couple different ways or industries and in development, there's a couple of different things you can look at, right? You could look at numbers and then you can look at percentage growth. So we know that some of the things that say like in the next 10 years that we're anticipating growing the most are actually going to be things like wind turbine service technicians, right? Solar installers, and really a lot of the rest of the list is going to be healthcare professionals. So not so much in the port, although that, is involved, but, we're seeing part of that as we have shifts in the demographics of our populations in general, especially as the birth rate has fallen in the United States, right? So we're not seeing as many in that younger generation as the older generation. So a lot in healthcare, but we will definitely see some of those jobs percentage wise grow a lot in those kind of green or sustainable economy type jobs. And so I think that is an opportunity. Like I said, it's not just about being able to capture the work, but also prepare our workforce for those kinds of work. That's we actually are seeing some of that with job training that is being made available to like on wind power for soldiers who are getting out of the military, being trained into those jobs. So I'd like to see us do that more in the general community. As far as if you look at the last 100 years, the big section of the workforce that really hasn't changed, because mostly what we've done is gone from like agricultural and a lot of that kind of stuff to things like IT. The things that really haven't changed are, service jobs, sales, things where people are working person to person. And those are the kind of jobs that I think are still going to actually make up that main section of that sandwich in our economy going forward, is where we're actually providing services and working directly with other human beings. Those are also the kinds of jobs that you cannot outsource and you cannot automate out completely, right? Elements of those jobs will, but I think we definitely want to look at how do we continue to support and engage people in using their, creativity, those human social skills and all of those things to develop into careers where those are going to be a little bit safer with some of those global changes we're going to see. But again, back to the kind of the solar energy, wind turbine, hydrogen, all of those things, those are going to be jobs that in the future you could get trained here and work here, and then you can go somewhere else and have that kind of employment, right? Kind of the way we were talking about mechanics earlier, or some of these other kinds of things. I do see that there's going to be this opportunity where those are going to be, part of the trades in the future. And so that would be something that we do. But again, one of the things that I think is really important about the port is that we have a lot of money come through the port. I want to make sure a lot of it is staying in our community, right? Because a lot of the destinations for cargo coming through are not necessarily in Washington, and that's great, as long as there are jobs associated to the port so that we can, do things like pay for medical services, go out to restaurants, use those other personal services, which we know are going to continue to probably be a big component of our workforce.
Thank you. All right, we have one last question and we have about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you to keep it quick, this answer quick, because I want to give you a little bit of time to make a final statement before we're done, and then invite Marquise to wrap us up. But so the Port of Tacoma, like all commercial and industrial lands, represents the most concentrated source of ongoing toxic contamination to the Puget Sound. The Puyallup River juvenile salmon have some of the highest concentrations of toxic chemicals. How would you use your position to reduce ongoing toxic pollution to protect the health of people who eat those fish and other animals that eat that fish? Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. One of the things, and thank you for the question. One of the things we've been doing is remediation habitat is critically important for us. I mentioned the lower Wapato Creek area that we're doing, Gogol Heidi, things of that nature that we've helped with the spawning, and also the fish when they do come out of the Puyallup River. So they do have places where they can actually feed and grow. This is critically important. Fish habitat is necessary. Places circling waters where not only salmon habitat, but wildlife habitat. 13-acre site along Marine View Drive is something we did along with grants. One of the things I would encourage all viewers or anybody else to go to our website and take a peek at our environmental part of it. And we did a film with it recently. I think you'd find it very enlightening. We need to be able to have the waters clean and restored back to its natural habitat. The port uses a lot of monies doing that, and we're going to continue to do that. It's only better once we establish a clean, we were a Superfund site at one time, and we still are. And that's not the right kind of word you want to associate with a port or with any area. We've done a lot to clean that up, and we're not done yet. We still got a lot of work to do, but working in conjunction with the Puyallup tribe, the city of Tacoma, the city of Fife, we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Good. Thank you. Elizabeth, what are you going to do to protect the fish and the people who eat the fish?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of for me that it's yes, and there's two parts to this. One is, what are we doing then is the local remediation, and whether that is, using biological ways, biofilm, algae, different kinds of things to kind of filter out and process toxins, whether it is actually trying to, displace and replace, water or earth. There's that aspect to it. And then there's also this other aspect that over the next few decades, we are really seeing this risk of the sea level rise actually rising up and causing other pollution to enter our waterways. So if we put all of our eggs in the basket of just remediating what the issues are right now, and we're not coming up with those solutions, whether it's, sea breaks or different kinds of things that we're going to do to protect the local, the water, as well as reducing emissions, then we're just going to see as buildings get flooded, as different, waste sites get flooded and dropped into the sound, we're just going to be kind of putting it right back in there. And so it definitely is a two-pronged approach of looking at like what are the best filtration and toxic remediation processes, but also how are we protecting ourselves from basically having to keep doing this for the rest of our lives, basically.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we have exactly 2 minutes before we're done. So I'm going to give you a minute each to kind of thank the audience and make your final statement, and then I'll pass it to Marquise. So Elizabeth, would you like to go first?
Ooh, yes. 1 minute. So yeah, first of all, thank you for letting me participate in this. I have to say this was kind of one of the more fun forums that I feel like we've gotten to have. It just kind of felt a lot more like a conversation, and maybe it's because Dick and I know each other so well now over Zoom. We've been doing a few of these.
We'll meet someday, that's for sure.
Yes. And so really what I would just say is that, definitely if you liked anything that I was talking about tonight, check out my website, follow me on socials, Pew Report, or like, again, going to my sci-fi pew, 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 pew report. And really, let me know what your thoughts are about, am I on the right track? Are things like, environmental accountability, economic justice, COVID recovery, are these your top issues? Are there other things that you're seeing happening related to the port that you'd like me to be looking more into? And also give me your thoughts about those kinds of topics. Definitely open to the conversation, and, never stop learning. But again, thank you for the opportunity, and would really, appreciate your support and your votes. But I look forward to the conversation either way.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Dick.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank the Citizens for a Healthy Bay for all the work that all of you do. It sometimes goes unsaid, but you're the spearhead out there. You're in the boats out there making sure things happen. And I appreciate, I know the port does all your work that you do. Thank you for this forum. I appreciated it. I would encourage all your viewers to go to the port's website, look at habitat remediation and what we've done in the past and what we're doing in the future, things of that nature. I too would appreciate your vote, but I'm here more or less because I wanted to let everybody know what we do for the environment and things of that nature. I think it's critically important that port plays a big role in helping to clean up our environment. So once again, thank you all. Appreciate it and hope you all have a nice evening.
Well, thank you both for being willing to answer all the questions and do it in a way that was very easy to follow and easy to understand. And I've enjoyed my time with both of you. And so I will pass it to Marquise to wrap us up. And again, thank you both. Or Melissa, I don't know which one of you is taking it from here, but I think my job is done. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yes, Tanisha, you are done. You're off the clock. Just kidding. You have like 2 more minutes. But thank you everybody so much. I'm really quickly going to give the folks at home just a little bit of info about the elections. So you'll see in the chat, we're going to drop a link for folks to find some information. So let me pull up a slide real quick. Take just a minute. We're going to be out of here in 2 minutes, I promise. All righty. So as you'll see on my screen, if I can get it pulled up there, ballots are due August 3rd. And so make sure you have a plan to vote. It's very, very important. We both want to know what races are up, and we also want to know who is running. And then we want to know what's our plan? What day are you going to do it? How much time do you think you're going to need? Do you have transportation figured out? All that good stuff. That's the last thing we want you all to do. You're welcome to join us tomorrow night. We will obviously have the other seat, which is seat 4, and those candidates. But again, make sure you have the day that you're going to vote. Make sure you know the races and maybe look into the candidates a little bit if you can. So yeah, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop sharing for Facebook Live now. And again, thank you for joining us. We'll see everyone else for part 2 tomorrow.